Good morning everyone and welcome to NI Planner Live. My name is Mira Quigley and I'm an urban designer with Urban Scale Interventions. I will be acting as your chair for the session, which is entitled Placemaking to Deliver for Communities. So first of all, a big thank you to our sponsors, Arup and Landmark Chambers, who have helped make the event happen. As well as that, if you're using social media or you're tweeting, can you please use the hashtag NIPlanLive2020. And throughout the sessions, as we hear from the speakers, feel free to submit questions through the chat, and we'll come back to them at the end for a round of Q&A with our panel of speakers today. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our three speakers, which I'm very excited to do today. Our first is Ciaran Fox. Ciaran was appointed Director of RSUA in June 2015 after 10 years with the Construction Employers Federation. RSUA is a charity dedicated to improving the built environment through good architecture. It's also the professional body for architects based in Northern Ireland and is an alliance with RIBA. RSUA has about 1,000 members. Ciaran is also former chair of the Northern Ireland Construction Group and the current chair of Climate NI. He also sits on the Construction Industry Forum for Northern Ireland. Our second speaker is Ruth Montgomery from Rural Housing Association. She's the Business Development Manager, and her role is, she's responsible for overseeing the delivery of Rural Housing's shared neighbourhoods work, as well as coordinating community relations initiatives in isolated rural communities across Northern Ireland. This is the aim of building vibrant, connected rural communities. Ruth also works alongside the Northern Ireland Housing Executive to deliver rural housing needs tests with the aim of identifying hidden need for social housing in rural communities. Ruth is an MSc in Communications, PR and Advertising from Ulster University. And our third speaker of this session is Herron from PlayBoard. Alan was appointed in 2009 and oversees a range of PlayBoard services, including policy development, advocacy, play training, research and evaluation and school community-based play programmes. At a policy level, Alan was centrally involved in the development of NI's first ever play and leisure policy, the development and rollout of the Bright Star childcare programme and the Executive's Plays Matters programme. At council level, Alan leads on the development of play strategies aimed at enhancing access to quality play opportunities. Alan has over 20 years experience working with the community and voluntary sector, and prior to joining PlayBoard he was Director of Community Services with Age Concern. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ciaran Fox, who will be speaking about the RSUA's Our Change Place initiative. Thank you. Over to you, Ciaran.
Thank you very much, Mira, and thanks for the opportunity to speak at the event. I am going to talk today about the Our Changed Place NI initiative, which was generated in, I suppose, springtime, and it was very much in response to COVID and the lockdown and the wave of, I suppose, interest in what needed to change in our built environment, what could change, and how things could be improved, not just in the short term, but also very much in the long term. So there was a very clear shift in that beautiful spring weather when people had to stay close to their homes. They had to spend time in their own neighbourhoods. A lot of people were focused on walking and cycling. There wasn't much traffic on the roads, and of course what that does is it creates a much greater sensory experience when you're walking in your neighbourhood rather than driving through it. In terms of, is my camera sharing okay?
You know, Ciaran, I was just going to ask if you wouldn't mind turning your camera on. That would be great. I'll get to see your face.
Yeah, sorry, it does say that my camera is on here.
So the button, third button over on the panel, start my webcam, is that turned on?
It is, yeah.
Okay, let's look into it. If you want to keep on, our technical staff here might be able to advise. Also, somebody submitted a comment that it is very hard to hear. Has the hearing? There we go, Ciaran. There's your camera on now. Anyway, is that still? Do you want to test the sound, Ciaran, and just make sure everyone can hear? Okay.
Sure. Or I'll just say hello or say something. Is it coming across okay?
Are delegates able to hear us okay now? Yeah, if you continue and maybe someone will pick it up in the chat, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I was just really setting the scene anyhow in terms of the particular experience that a lot of people had in those early stages of lockdown, out walking. People seem to be getting closer to nature. The contact points, so the surfaces they were walking on, suddenly become more important. The visual impact of the built environment around them, people become more aware of it, and also the whole community effect of more people being out and about in the neighbourhood. It was something that clearly roused something in a lot of individuals and communities, and there was a sense of how can we tap into that, and how do we help this not only be an opportunity to look at changes to the physical environment now to facilitate a life with COVID, I suppose, but also to deliver longer term change. And just the image there is of one of the few very tangible things that have changed. There's a temporary cycle lane, pop-up cycle lane on Dublin Road in Belfast. I'm talking about that lasting legacy. So what are the key things that everybody wanted to see, or at least that are some of the key policy drivers behind this? Cleaner air is, I suppose, very quickly moving up the agenda in terms of priorities. Even whenever climate change has been, I suppose, uh, not rejected, but some people who are maybe suspicious of it or are concerned whether that's really the driver. Clean air seems to be something that everybody can unite around, that it's a good thing. The second part being reduced carbon emissions. The science, of course, for the need for reduced carbon emissions has been accepted by governments across the world now, and there's very clear targets for 2050. So that's a big driver. Improved well-being, so the opportunity for both the physical benefits and the mental health benefits of people having more exercise, being outdoors more, interacting more with nature and with others. And then finally, economic resilience, and that is both in the short term and the longer term. Economic resilience in terms of how can the economy get back up and running whilst lots of restrictions are in place, but also how can the economy transition to something new that still delivers on those other requirements of cleaner air, reduced carbon emissions, and improved well-being. And one of the examples there is just of a project in Malahide in Dublin where the new street in Malahide was closed for traffic to allow people to continue to socialise, to allow those food and drink businesses to have space outdoors. And one of the sort of developing challenges was that the science very clearly spoke of an increased risk from being indoors in terms of transmission. So it put a much greater focus on what could be done outdoors. And of course, it was in a particularly good period of weather, which always makes things easier. Um, One of the key drivers behind our Change Place NI was the understanding that COVID-19 was impacting on everybody across every possible societal divide. it was impacting on everyone, and a very clear sense that everybody should have a voice in that conversation about what changes to our physical environment should take place. And we in our SUA felt it was important to try to instigate that debate and discussion, particularly amongst people who maybe wouldn't have been drawn in to the discussion previously. And that's where we felt social media has an absolutely central role in that wider outreach, and also a real focus on the local, the things that people know. No one knows their own area better than people living there. And quite often, in terms of engaging with the built environment, policy documents and plan documents in terms of the longer term changes can be so difficult for people to engage with. And we felt this was an opportunity for people to engage at a very, very local level. So the hashtag was #ChangePlaceNI, and it called specifically on residents, parents, children, business owners, workers, and everybody who's interested to post their ideas about the changes they'd like to see, and to use the hashtag so that there was a collective sort of a way of pulling this all together. The factors we asked people to consider were social distancing of pedestrians. And at that initial stage, it was around the 2 metre social distancing, so quite difficult to maintain. Queues outside shops and for public transport. And of course, again, queues outside shops in the early stages of lockdown were very prevalent. The desire for food and beverage businesses to reopen with tables in the public realm. Safe space for everyday cycling for people of all ages, but particularly school children. And that was with a view to this return to school in September. And then, of course, space for cycle parking, and not forgetting the need for space for motor vehicles. And we put all those factors in to, I suppose, try and illustrate that there is a competition for space, that it is a matter of looking at how that shared space is best divided up. Because quite often we would hear maybe from one perspective. So, for example, let's have more room for the business to expand out so they can serve their coffee or their sandwiches, or the bars to expand out and serve drinks on the pavement. But of course, that then has a consequent impact for people who want to walk on the pavement. So then they have to be put onto the road. And then that has a consequent impact for the cyclists and the cars, and that reduces their space. So it's that sense of really trying to consider things in the whole. So what we asked people to do was to look at their own neighbourhood, to put a post on social media about a particular place. That was the primary push. To look at a street or a village or something that you know well, and to suggest a solution. It doesn't have to be fully formed, but at least to start a conversation around how this might look. And we encourage people to be creative. Don't think it has to be a long written format. It could be a sketch, it could be a drawing, a photograph, it could be scribbles. It's that sense of starting a conversation. And the people and businesses of the area need to be engaged if we're going to make some of the longer term changes that are going to be required if we're to deliver on climate change. And just a little image that goes along with this slide was there's a great mapping function on the Northern Ireland GIS website, which is publicly available, where you can go into the maps and kind of effectively put little markers and draw shapes around. That's a really, really good tool for the public to be able to engage with their local area, and effectively mark up a map and then say, this is what I'd like to see. So from the Royal Society of Ulster Architects, we were very clear from the outset this should not be an initiative from the architects. It's important that it has a broad church of support and is driven in that way. So already at this stage, there is support from a long list of both departmental government bodies and other professional bodies, and that's continuing to grow. We're hoping in the very, very near term to have the Department for Communities also added to that list. And then I've already been engaging with the local councils around their support, and in many ways the local councils will be best placed to take some of these ideas forward, as they're perhaps most closely connected to the local areas. So the idea was about trying to generate actions now, or to get the conversation going now, and it definitely achieved that in those initial few months, with lots of ideas coming forward from people as to what could change in their local area. Um, we we are keen to continue to widen the number of organisations supporting, and because there's no financial or resource implication to being a supporting organisation, we're hoping that this can continue to grow, and then we'll be able to list all of the organisations supporting this, and really continue to drive the debate around it in terms of what changes can be brought about. And I suppose that the fundamental for me is that we need to be really careful that there isn't only a voice provided by those communities who maybe have strong advocacy powers already, or who are already engaging in this. And for me, a really important next step on this process is ensuring that there's sufficient support made available to communities who perhaps are less capable of engaging themselves in some of these issues. There might not be the professional expertise embedded within the community, and it's important that that is provided in some way. And a natural way in my mind to start the sort of prioritization of this is just looking at the deprivation index, which ranks every ward in Northern Ireland, and it's important that communities are not left behind in this conversation. But it very much is about starting the debate. The next part is then how do we ensure that that debate helps to deliver some change. So I'm hoping that I have time for a couple of bonus items, and I'm looking at you, Muriel, on this one. If I don't, I'm happy to wind up there. If I do,
Yeah, Ciaran, we probably have a couple of minutes if you want to show the slides. Yeah, keep it.
I'll just rattle through two things: Open Ormo and the RSUA Arab Active Schools Index. So these are both sort of outworkings of the Art Change Place NI initiative. So the Open Ormo was my own personal response as a resident of the Ormo Road, so a main arterial route into Belfast. I felt a personal obligation to put forward an idea for what we could try on the Ormo Road, and simply by putting out a tweet with a map sketched up on, very, very simply with effectively like a marker, an online marker, suggested that we close the Ormo Road, or a stretch of it, to most traffic for the weekends over the summer. And that was to allow more space for people to walk. It was allow space for people to cycle. It was to enable the restaurants and bars to reopen with lots of outdoor space, and to allow the other businesses to trade in a very productive way with high footfall. Now, the one thing it definitely achieved was enormous debate. It got great interaction, and it engaged the community in a way that I possibly couldn't have imagined. The number of people in response to the tweet who volunteered to find a way to make it happen, or to try to make it happen, or to help the community conversation was enormous, and it ended up with a team of volunteers leading a community conversation on it. There was an online survey set up. There were 5,000 leaflets dropped through the door in response to it. I think there was just short of 1,000 responses to the survey, and it generated an enormous debate. Now, it got quite heated at times, because some of a small number of the businesses were very, very strongly, very vehemently against some of the proposals in it. And ultimately, it exposed some of the weaknesses in our both, I suppose, the legislative setup when it comes to reallocating space in Northern Ireland. There only are two bits of legislation. One was it has to be an event, and this wasn't about an event. This was about something that would happen every weekend. And the other piece of legislation was about safety, that the only way to bring it forward was under a piece of safety legislation. Neither were good fits, and ultimately that was one of the big obstacles that we ran into. There will be some positive outcomes, but it certainly didn't happen in terms of how it was originally envisaged. And the other thing just to talk about very briefly was about this RSUA and Arab Active School Travel Index. And one of the core discussion points of our Change Place NI was about ensuring or trying to explore how we could find ways to encourage an increase in active travel to school in particular, with a view that if we could start to make progress on that, well, maybe a lot of other things would then be sorted out along the way. And we are very, very, very close to now launching this active school travel index along with Arab. The aim of it is to have a digital tool that effectively ranks every school in Northern Ireland by its active travel capacity. So for the pupils going to that school, is it easy for them to walk? Is it easy for them to cycle? Is there provision in place to make that straightforward, or is there not? And our primary interest is from the physical infrastructure side of it. But of course, there are many other factors. I mean, one of the things that immediately came back from some initial discussions around this was, well, even for girls going to school, if the school uniform is skirts and they are having to have big heavy bags. So there's lots of other societal issues here, but it's really looking primarily from our side at the physical infrastructure in place that facilitates active travel to school, because we have unbelievably low levels of cycling in particular to school. I think for between primary school and secondary school in Northern Ireland, it's between 0 and 1% of school journeys are taken by bicycle, or yes, across both primary and secondary, 0 to 1%. So this, by trying to create a tool which ranks, we hope that it will, I suppose, first of all, identify those schools which need interventions in the local area as a priority, and also start to see where there are overlaps, where there might be 3, 4, 5 schools in an area where one road is vitally important to all of those schools, and again, that would help create priority for action. So there's a lot more. That probably is deserving of a presentation in itself, but happy to take questions on that as part of the discussion at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ciaran. That was a really interesting and insightful presentation. I think what really resonated for me was the idea of starting a conversation, and I think any of us here Twitter users will have seen the Open Normal and the discussions around some of the ideas around our Change Place happening. So I think that's really, really nice to see the background and how that all came around. So thank you very much. I will, folks, please, as Ciaran said, please add any questions you have for him into the chat, and we'll come to them all at the end. So I'll now hand over to Ruth, who will be speaking about the Rural Housing Association's Old Mill Court in Sion Mills, one of my favourite places. And she'll be talking about the contribution that this has made to the community through quality placemaking. This project was actually a finalist at the RTPI Planning Excellence Awards, so I'm looking forward to hearing from Ruth. Thanks.
Thank you, Maura. I'm glad to hear Sion Mills is one of your favourite places. So this morning I'm going to share how Old Mill Court in Sion Mills has been re-imaged in how we see social housing, but also as a housing for all scheme that's having those clear community benefits as well. So as I said, Old Mill Court is a social housing scheme, and it's located right in the centre of Sion Mills. But the scheme is also a shared neighbourhood or housing for all scheme. So that means that we receive funding from the Department for Communities and the Housing Executive to deliver a series of good relations activities in the area. So when we were designing the scheme in Old Mill Court, along with GM Design Associates, who were the architects for the scheme, we wanted to make sure that we captured the rich history of the village in the design of the project, particularly because Sion Mills is famous as a linen producing village due to Herron's mill. But we also wanted to make sure that we were having that clear community benefit for the surrounding area as well. So during my presentation, I'm going to first look at the architecture of the scheme, which reflects that local character of the local area, but also some of the community engagement activities that we've been carrying out and that promote integrated and connected communities. So if we go back to 2014, ourselves and GM Design Associates published a rural design guide. And the purpose of this design guide was to provide a framework that planners could use when they were developing social housing in rural areas to be sympathetic to the surrounding rural context or environment. So when we were working with GM Design Associates to come up with a design for the project, we wanted to make sure that we captured the principles of this rural design guide specifically made for social housing in rural communities. And to us that was really important in terms of placemaking and also in terms of re-imaging social housing, particularly in rural areas. So first and foremost, we wanted to ensure that the design of the scheme reflected the historical context of Sion Mills, to have that sense of cohesion between the new and the old. So to make sure that we captured the character of the local area, GM Design Associates conducted a series of studies looking at the vernacular buildings that were in the surrounding area, but they also looked at some of the key historical buildings that were within Sion Mills village, particularly Herdman's Mill and Sion Stables. So they looked at what were the type of materials that were used in these buildings and the types of detailing that was present in the historic buildings that could be replicated in the design of Old Mill Court. And to us that was really important in terms of having that connection between the new and the old. So Sion Stables played a particularly important part in terms of the material selection for some of the properties in Old Mill Court. So if we look at the brickwork, now I'm sorry it's not particularly clear from the slide, but you'll have to take my word for it in this case. So GM Design Associates selected a rustic brick using an English bond detailing for some of the properties in Old Mill Court. And this is actually a style that is also within Sion Stables. So it was ensuring that there was that connection between the historic buildings within Sion Mills and within the new properties in Old Mill Court. One other area worth noting was GM Design Associates' decision to recreate an old cottage which had actually stood on the very site of Old Mill Court. So you can actually see it on the screen there. So architects wanted to bring this old cottage back to life in the design of the old scheme as a way of connecting the history of the site itself with the new development of Old Mill Court. And as you can see, the building on your right, which is now a complex needs home, is actually some of the detailing that was present in the old original cottage. So again, it's carrying that theme of connecting the old with the new. We also wanted to ensure that some of the design features in the scheme also connected with the agricultural context of the surrounding community. So there's a strong farming community in the Sion Mills. So we wanted to ensure that we replicated this in the design of the scheme. And we've done this through the inclusion of textured rendering, which you can see on the white property. And that's very much reminiscent of the old whitewashed buildings and traditional farmhouses. We've also included fibre cement corrugated sheeting, and again you can see that in the photograph on the bottom right of your screen, and that again replicates the old corrugated tin roofs that would have been present on agricultural buildings, but also within the original cottage that stood on the site. And finally you can see we've included sliding barn doors on several of the properties within the development, and again that replicates that agricultural context of the surrounding community as well, but also it ties it into the sliding barn doors that are present on Sion Mills Stables as well. So that's how we reflected the rural surroundings of Sion Mills in the design of our scheme. But next, to us, really important to the concept of placemaking is a sense that a scheme is actually rooted within the community in which it's developed. So whilst the design of the scheme, as you can see, is very much reflective of the surrounding community, we also wanted to make sure that we had that sense of cohesion between tenants that were moving into the scheme and the surrounding community as well. So as I said earlier, Old Mill Court is a Housing for All scheme, and that means that we receive funding from the Department for Community and the Northern Ireland Housing Executive to deliver good relations activities in the area and to produce a 5-year good relations plan. And the aim of that is to create integrated and connected communities in Sion Mills. So not just in Old Mill Court, but we want that impact across Sion Mills as a whole. So what I've done here is I've included a framework of our good relations plan rather than going into specific details in terms of content. So in the process of creating our 5-year good relations plan, the first step was engagement. So engagement to us is really important in terms of making sure that we're developing a good relations plan that really meets the needs of the local people. So in the development of our 5-year good relations plan, we established an advisory group, and it was made up of statutory and voluntary agencies that were already working within Sion Mills but had that expert knowledge that we could tap into. But alongside that, we also wanted to engage with the tenants that were moving into the scheme. So tenants moved in last December in 2019. So once they moved in, we conducted community surveys and face-to-face conversations with tenants to see what they would like to see in their community, so they had a sense of ownership over the process. The second area of our good relations plan is around bonding. So we have to remember that the tenants that moved into the scheme didn't know their neighbours. A few may have been new to the area. So it was really important for us to generate that sense of community and that sense of belonging within the scheme. So bonding events are events that are chosen by tenants themselves, and basically they provide an opportunity for tenants to engage in social activities and get to know each other with the aim of generating that sense of community belonging within the scheme. So the third area is bridging, and to me bridging is probably the most important area of the good relations plan because it focuses on building a sense of community and cohesion between not just tenants within the scheme, but also between tenants and the surrounding area as well. So for this element of the good relations plan delivery, we partnered with the main community organisations that were already working in the area. So that's the likes of Sion Mills Community Forum, Sion Mills Community Association, and Sion Mills Building Preservations Trust. And they have enabled us to deliver good relations activities, not just to tenants, but to the whole of Sion Mills area. And that demonstrates that Old Mill Court is having an impact, not just within the grounds of Old Mill Court, but actually for the whole village of Sion Mills. And that enables us to sustain that good relations activity in the area. And some examples of good relations activities that we've been delivering are cultural diversity projects, exploring culture from around the world. We also have included mindfulness and positive health projects, senior citizens, art classes, which are all around tackling social isolation and loneliness. The fourth element of our good relations plan is ensuring that it's tenant-led. So we wanted tenants to have an input into the content of the good relations plan, ultimately to have their buy-in. So we want them to participate in good relations activities going forward. So we established a tenant steering group, and the purpose of this tenant steering group is to provide a forum where our tenants can actually communicate with us and share what they would like to see in terms of good relations delivery in their area, and that's really important in terms of having their buy-in and also building their capacity as drivers for change in their area. But underpinning all the work that we are carrying out in Sion Mills is a commitment to the executive offices together building a united community strategy, which is all around creating more united and connected communities. And the 4 priorities that we aim to address through our good relations work is about creating that positive attitudinal change between people from different communities, creating safe communities that are free from sectarianism or discrimination, focusing on the use of shared space, but also creating shared space. So we've started to use Old Mill Court itself as a shared space within the community of Sion Mills, particularly for the delivery of community relations initiatives during COVID-19. Also, the final priority is around celebrating cultural diversity. So recognising that Northern Ireland is becoming more multicultural It's important to develop that respect for diversity through learning about other cultures, and that's a real focus of some of the work that we've been carrying out in recent months. So going forward, what is our vision for Old Mill Court? So we want Old Mill Court to become a fully integrated and inclusive community where residents from different community backgrounds live alongside each other and respect each other's cultures and traditions. So we want them to feel safe within the boundaries of Old Mill Court. But we also want to make sure that we have a wider impact upon the village of Sion Mills through the delivery of our good relations activities. So we've focused on 5 key areas of work. We want to continue to provide those good relations activities and projects that promote integration between people from different community backgrounds, particularly community relations activities within the grounds of Old Mill Court itself. We want to continue to engage with the statutory agencies and the voluntary agencies that are already working within Sion Mills to have that joined up approach to our work. And we also want to generate that sense of community belonging, promote shared space and build the capacity of our tenants. So I have a short video because I'm aware I'm running out of time. So Adam, you can play the
What do you bottle it up for when you could just talk to me? If you just opened up more, I could put you at ease. So tell me the worries that haunt you. It's okay if you cry. Your words will never leave this room. I'll never be out of sight. Tell me if you wanna talk it out. It's okay if you wanna scream and shout. 'Cause I am the light inside your door. I am the footprints on the floor. You're my never-ending dream. You are everything I need. I am the bed in which you lie. I am the breath you blow away.
So Old Mill Court in Sion Mills is Rural Housing Association's first Housing for All scheme. The project is funded through the Department for Communities and the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. As part of this Housing for All scheme, we have developed a 5-year good relations plan for the Sion Mills area. So this good relations plan focuses on building relationships between tenants of the new scheme and the surrounding community with the aim of breaking down community barriers and building long and lasting relationships. So in partnership with Art Sector, we developed a diversity boxes educational project, and as part of that project we wanted to help residents in Sion Mills learn about different cultures from around the world with the aim of helping build respect for diversity. This all took place during the COVID-19 pandemic, where face-to-face interaction was not possible. So as a result, we were able to deliver educational packs to families across Sion Mills, sharing information about cultures from around the world and helping them learn about different cultural groups through arts and crafts, recipes, cultural fact sheets and online links.
'Cause I am the light inside your door. I am the footprints on the floor. You're my never-ending dream. You are everything.
I really enjoyed it. I think to learn about other people's culture it kind of opens the door for the likes of Owen growing up. I think it takes away from the likes of bullying, schools, racism, things like that. Plus we learn how to cook different foods. The boxes are amazing because you have different recipes, and we had fun with it, as you can see.
I love living here. It is a beautiful home, and realizing are very kind, and they always arrange activities, and there's a nice community. Then the last week just underneath it. I love these little boxes, and I hope it's not too long until you something else going.
Everything I need, you're all I need. You're everything I need. You're all I need. I am the light inside your door. I am the footprints on the floor. You're my never-ending dream. You are everything I need. I am the bed in which you lay. I am the breath you blow away. You're the place where I find peace. You are everything I need. You're everything I need.
Great, thank you very much, Ruth. That was a really excellent presentation, and I think we'll all agree that that joined up approach and that kind of strategic approach to housing development and something that and design quality is something that we'd love to see rolled out across Northern Ireland. Yeah, and as one of our attendees mentioned, very relevant to see such a brilliant project during Good Relations Week as well. So I will move on to our final speaker, Alan Herron from PlayBoard. Alan will be discussing the planning and spatial aspects of play and its role in delivering placemaking. Over to you, Alan.
That's great. Thank you, Mira, and good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be invited along to speak today. It's going to be a slight change of pace, I suppose, in terms of what I'm going to cover here. And I'll make no apologies. I am going to cover a fairly broad range of areas, because I feel in order to really, I suppose, get an understanding or to start a discussion around, how you develop playable spaces for children and young people, and indeed for entire communities. You need to get a basic understanding and I suppose a sense of why play is so important, and why play has become in many of our communities a very minimalist activity, something we simply don't see. So first of all, I just want to tell you a wee bit about PlayBoard. Some of you may be familiar with our work, some of you may not, but we are the lead organisation for play in Northern Ireland, and I suppose our work really covers a fairly broad range of settings. We work in schools, we work with local councils, and we work with local communities. Obviously, as a play organisation, play is fundamental to everything we do, and ultimately we are about advocating for play as a key means of developing children and young people's physical, mental and emotional health. And I suppose over the years, as we've developed, we have become more involved in the policy side. We've provided expertise and guidance to both regional and local government, and we also have a UK and international influence through both the Four Nations UK Play Forum and the International Play Association. So in terms of play itself, what do we mean by play? Normally this would be the point if we were all in a room. We would do a bit of an interactive session. But when we talk about play, we really work alongside a common accepted definition, which states that play is, for play to be in its purest sense, it has to be freely chosen by the child with no predetermined outcome. So for example, whilst play may enhance your physical capacity or physical ability, that shouldn't be the only reason you're playing. Play should be personally directed with limited or no adult involvement. So in other words, it should be by the child for the child. Again, it should be intrinsically motivated, spontaneous, and it can happen anywhere. And it should also be fun, challenging, social and repeatable. What that really means is, and I suppose as a society we have come to really view play as something that takes place within more formalised settings such as playgrounds. But the focus shouldn't just be on playgrounds, it should be on housing areas. I've referenced PPS 7, PPS 8 there, which obviously were the old planning policy statements, which really referenced play. But we also have to think about communal green spaces. We have to think about our public and our community spaces, our urban centres, and we also have to think increasingly about our streets. And I'll cover some of those issues, those areas shortly. Okay, so before we move into that, then why play? Why is play so important, and why is it something we should be thinking about from a planning context? These are all fairly obvious. You don't need to be a genius to figure this stuff out, but if children are engaged in physical play, it will enhance their physical fitness and support improved health and well-being. We also know that play from the early years supports cognitive development. Play is also critical that in terms of improving self-confidence and encouraging creativity. Again, from an educational perspective and a learning perspective, play is fundamental to learning capacity, memory skills, and language development. Now, it also supports social development. When you think about play itself, it is fundamentally a social activity. So, for us, play is the point in time where children really experience and get involved in dealing with conflict for the first time, sharing. It's the first time they really get into situations where they have to control their impulses, where they have to learn how to control how they deal with other children and young people. And finally, play provides exposure to challenge, enhancing ability to assess and manage risk. And this is something which in a risk-averse society has become increasingly of concern for us. Children naturally will push themselves. They will seek out challenge. They will try to expand their horizons physically, emotionally, in terms of the types of experiences they undertake. So they will naturally seek out risky situations. And it's important we recognise that and we actually plan to provide those risky and challenging play opportunities within controlled settings. Okay, so the benefits for the individual are fairly self-evident, but what are the wider benefits of play from a community perspective? And again, there's a vast array of research here in terms of the impact play, where you get play right within communities, can actually contribute wider. We know that it helps in terms of tackling exclusion. We know that it helps in terms of developing community relations. Play is fundamental to all children and young people, regardless of their background. So where children have an opportunity to play, they will play together, they will explore different perspectives and so on in a very natural way, and they will come to an understanding and a social connection. Play is also important in terms of intergenerational relations. It's important in terms of helping us to develop safer communities, healthier communities, and communities where really community cohesion comes to the fore, where children and young people are seen as an integral part of the community itself. Okay, so what's the big issue then in terms of play itself? Why is this important? Well, I just want to very briefly just look at the change, I suppose, in terms of children's play over the last 50 or so years. We looked at 3 levels within a family. So we looked at grandfather's play, which would have been around about the 1950s. When we looked at it, what we found was that child, as a child, was allowed to roam and play within a 4-mile space. So you can see on the screen there the broad area or space that the child was able to roam in order to play. And all play was away from home. It was away from adults. Father's play, then we skip forward 20 or so years, 30 years, and the space for play has reduced quite significantly. So now that 4 miles has reduced down to approximately 1 mile. Play is a combination of inside and outside. However, the majority of it is still outside, which is a positive. And then we get to the current group of children and young people. And again, as you see, it has diminished even further. What research shows us is that for the majority of children in this day and age, they're allowed to play in the street outside their home, approximately 250 yards or as far as their parent or carer can see them. So again, safety is one of the key issues for them. And play is a combination of in and out of the home now. This 50-50 split was a number of years ago. I would suggest it has now gone the opposite side. I would imagine the majority of play is now indoors. And I should say, I mentioned formal play areas. You see for many children, play is now something they experience within more formalised play areas, which are outside of their communities. Okay, so why has this happened? And again, this is all self-evident. We know this. It's not rocket science. There have been a range of barriers to play have come up. We have a lack of access to and conflicts over local spaces for play and leisure. We all live very busy lives, and for parents themselves, they have to juggle the time pressures of work and all of the other things that happen and the constraints of modern living. We know as a society we still have not really provided inclusive and integrated opportunities for children with disabilities to play with their peers. And we do have an issue around sedentary lifestyle, so we have the growth of technology. I'll mention some of that shortly in terms of the recent COVID-19 experience. For older children and young people, We do also have the introduction of financial, transport and social restrictions which limit play and leisure opportunities. I'll talk a wee bit about older children shortly, but again, once children develop that sense of independence, they find their play opportunities limited purely by the geography of where they live. And also parental fears. We do live in a very risk-averse society. Parents quite rightly are concerned about their children's health and well-being. But the most common issues we hear are perceived stranger danger, risk of injury, and so on. And these are often given as reasons as to why play needs to be limited or needs to be restricted. So what's the impact of this in terms of children and young people? Sort of carrying on from the previous slide there, some research we carried out recently showed that 99.8% of parents recognise the importance of risk and challenge in play, but 50% wouldn't let their children play outdoors unsupervised. And quite commonly what we heard was from parents was, yeah, I had a great time as a child, I involved myself in lots of challenging and risky play experiences, but I wouldn't want my child doing that, even though they could recognise the benefits that came from that for them. 59% of children tell us they never leave their garden to play. When you think about the connection into the community and how children actually engage in a positive manner with their community, if those children are not actually playing in it, if they're not visible, then that has a significant impact in terms of community cohesion and community development. And in terms of health and well-being, we know that around 20% of children in Northern Ireland are overweight or obese by the time they start primary school. And this is an issue which we would certainly attribute to the decline in physical play, but our chief medical officers recently also came out with a statement attributing the increase in childhood obesity partially down to the decline in physical play and play within communities. There's always a financial impact to these things in terms of the obesity crisis. Around about £47 billion per year goes out of the exchequer to address obesity. Now, what we do know with children and young people, if children are active in their play, if they're active when they're young, they will remain active, or they're more likely to remain active throughout adulthood. So again, we have an opportunity through play, which is natural, which children want to do. We have an opportunity to actually impact on some of these big issues that we as a society are facing. And we also know 67% of children prefer unstructured free play. So in other words, they would prefer to be playing in the streets, in the communities where they live, rather than travelling to a play area, a fixed play area, as we call it. In terms of COVID, some worrying signs coming up through as well. Research we recently undertook over the summer there highlighted that 43% of children are spending less time engaged in physical play, 91% less time in social play, and 79% are spending more time in technological play. Now, obviously, lockdown impacts on that, but our fear and concern is that some of these patterns may continue for children, and we will actually see a further decline in the physical free play that children really need to be engaging in to help their physical and their social development. In terms of planning then, what are the key issues really? Within residential areas, again, this is all fairly self-evident. Many urban areas we do see a dearth of playable spaces. Priority is often given to cars and parking. Within residential areas, there is that sense that, particularly because of the through road nature, that traffic itself limits opportunities to play outdoors. We see reduced garden provision or gardens given over to parking, again linking back to the prioritisation of the car. And a lack of communal green spaces to support free play. And linking into that also the low societal tolerance of children at play. And something which has become more self-evident over recent years. Just a few examples of that. These are just some headlines we've picked out over the years. Hobbits, he could be a criminal, what police told the girl 10 who chucked a hopscotch grid. These are not isolated, these do happen quite frequently. We had a poster campaign a few years ago by the PCSP in Belfast, playing out or playing up. And what we heard as a direct result of this campaign was parents began to keep their children in. Suddenly children who were outdoors playing, engaging in very healthy activities, were kept in because of this poster campaign, which essentially said if a child is playing out, they're probably up to no good. Another one, noisy children warned against playing in common areas. Children banned from playing outdoors by housing bosses. Council bans nursery from kids playing outside after a furious neighbour complains over noise. And again, we see an increase in schools who are keeping children in at playtime because of complaints from residents. And council to build a £12,000 noise barrier around the playground because the sound of children having fun is too loud. Again, these are all very real examples, but it highlights where we have, as a society, got things completely the wrong way around. We should be encouraging children to play more outdoors, but we're actually finding ways of preventing them just to keep older people and adults happy. Again, negative play messaging. We don't see as many of these now, but you do still see the old no ball game signs around, which are a very physical means of telling children you're not allowed to play in this area. And also in terms of older children and teens. So I know there's an issue in terms of teens often being seen as antisocial in their play, and I think it's something we do often forget about. We do tend to think that play is something that stops at around about the age of 12 for children. It's not true. You know, we did a piece of research fairly recently where 97% of 16-year-olds told us they still wanted access to outdoor play and recreation spaces. 85% felt they were judged negatively because of their age, and 66% reported being moved on frequently while standing in the streets. When we asked these young people, what did you want? Really all they wanted was somewhere to shelter, a hangout spot, somewhere they could go to meet their friends, somewhere they could have their own space. Okay, so we know the positives of play, we know the issues in terms of the impact on individuals and so on, but how do you actually plan for effective playable spaces? I suppose, you know, there are a number of things you need to think about. These are taken from Design for Play by Play England, document we contributed to a number of years ago now. And there are 10 key principles there. I'll not go through them in detail, but you know, they're all fairly self-evident. You can find the document online that goes into more detail. But I suppose some of the key ones, you know, play spaces should be bespoke. They should be about the environment they're located within. There's no one size fits all within this. They should be embedded within the community. They should reflect the community. And they should highlight the positive benefits within that community itself. They should make use of natural resources. They should offer a wide range of play experiences. They should critically be accessible and provide integrated play opportunities for disabled and non-disabled children. And they should also allow children of all ages to play together. Again, we have a habit of dividing children into groups based on age. And again, that is something which actually detracts from the intergenerational development, but also the generational between peers themselves. Okay, so just a few images then. I just want to cover a couple of areas here. So I wanted to talk about fixed play. For many children, this would be the general experience of fixed play. We have some very good examples, which I'll go through shortly, but we also have some very bad examples. And this typically is the type of approach we take to meeting play need. And really what we should be trying to do is be creative. We should be trying to be innovative. And we should be probably aspiring to something more like this, something which actually is embedded within spaces, which reflects the environment, which reflects the community, and something which actually provides a degree of risk and challenge, and something slightly different than out of the ordinary. And again, just some examples in terms of the use of the natural environment, a bit more creativity, and something that's actually going to be a bit more appealing to children, and something that creates a space they want to be in. In terms of our public spaces, again, we do tend to have quite dour public spaces within Northern Ireland, but we need to get better at actually thinking, how can we introduce play? Children don't just flick a switch in their head at a point and go, I'm going to play for the next 10 minutes and then I will stop. Children are constantly playing. They're always looking out for something to play with. So we need to get better at planning our playable spaces to meet that need. Some local examples, you'll be aware possibly of Castle Place. We obviously had the Primark fire, and the council took the opportunity to introduce a playable zone within it. They deliberately moved away from a fixed play approach, and they went for something a bit more innovative. And the interesting thing about this was when we observed people that play, yes, children were playing here, but adults were also playing. Once adults see a playable space, they will go back to their childhood and they'll begin to engage with that space in a very positive manner. This is a recent one in Cathedral Gardens, opened a couple of weeks ago in Belfast, and again you can see doesn't look like a fixed play area. There's colour, there's brightness, there's a bit of creativity. And importantly, this space is also being used by older teens as a hangout zone, but it's also being used by parkour people within Belfast as well. So it's almost a whole community space. And I also just wanted to close in terms of looking at some non-fixed approaches to play. You don't need a fixed play area, you don't need equipment, you don't need a large capital expenditure. All you need is a space, a green space, a car park, a space that allows you to create a playable zone. These are examples from some work we've done down in Newrymorn and Down within rural communities. And it's loose parts play, as we call it, is literally bringing a lot of loose parts play equipment down, creating a play space and allowing the children the freedom to play in a way that meets their needs. And this is street play, something which I think will be coming more to the fore as we move forward. This is an example from a project we delivered in North Belfast, working with the community, working with young people, and working with local volunteers to close off streets for play for a couple of hours every week, just to allow the children to come back out, to be visible, and to engage with each other. And we found some very positive benefits for the project in terms of creating new friendships, but also actually developing relations between neighbours who quite frequently beforehand had never really spoken to each other, suddenly became engaged through their children's play. Just wanted to say something around COVID-19, reflecting back on the street play. In May 2020, Nicola Mallon, the Minister for Infrastructure, announced a drive towards quiet streets, specifically referencing pedestrians, cyclists and play having priority. And this is something we are currently working with the executive and with the department on, just in terms of developing guidance on street play and looking at how this could potentially be rolled out across communities. The final slide, what I wanted to say was, this is not a new issue. The issue of play being absent within communities has been around for a long time. This is an image from Belfast, and I don't know the date, but as far as I can ascertain, this is pre-Second World War. This is Earl Street, which was off York Street. And the council at the time were so concerned about the lack of children playing outdoors within the community, they suggested closing it off to traffic between the hours of 6:30 and 9:30 every night, except Saturdays and Sundays.
Thank you very much, Alan.
So that
was a really lovely presentation, and I think some really lovely examples in there of how we can create more general playfulness in our public spaces and places that we use, and how we can, as planners, support that through the development of these spaces. So thank you very much. We'll now move on to panel Q&A. So if I could ask each of the speakers to unmute your mics and turn on your webcam. And I will go through there's been quite a few questions come through during the talk, so thanks everyone for that. And I think I'll kick off with, we'll go back to you, Ciaran, at your presentation. I'll kick off with a question from Colleen. And she says that she used to live in Ormeau and really loved the community feel, and I love the idea of Open Ormeau. But what about if you don't live in Ormeau, if you live outside Belfast or somewhere like that, what would be your recommendations for starting something similar to actually start a conversation and start initiating that type of change that our changed place is trying to achieve?
I definitely think it's best started with neighbours, and that can be the old-fashioned way, which is talking to your neighbours and just seeing where that goes. That's the best. That's the best by far. I know it can be a wee bit awkward, the idea of knocking on someone's door who you don't know maybe very well, and that initial conversation. And I think it's just a matter of getting over that awkwardness and just putting yourself out there a little bit to get things going. It always takes a few people to start things, and then there's a lot of people who will love the fact that that's been started. The other thing that actually has proved really useful locally here for the Ormeau area has been Nextdoor, which of course, unlike other social media platforms, is very focused on the geography of the people in each group. So the Nextdoor app has been useful because it's brought people in from maybe streets that are 3 or 4 streets away from you who you wouldn't just chance across, and you certainly wouldn't be randomly knocking on their door saying hi, I'm from a few streets away. That might be a little bit odd. So that's actually been really good in terms of the opportunity to put an idea out there and then see what the response is from a wider group of people. And I think it's that, in my mind, an awful lot of this is about a willingness to try things. It's not about saying, look, here I've got lots of answers, and that's it, and who's with me to make these answers happen. It's more about, we can all identify the issues that are there, and if we don't do anything, well, nothing changes. How about we try? And that was very much from my perspective. Both, I noticed in the question there was a mention of Downmoor Avenue Street Party. That was some people in the street who said, it would be really good to have a street party. Let's see how that goes, and let's try it. And of course, it happened one year, and then people loved it, and then it happened the next year, and then it happened the next year. And that's how it happened. And the same with the Open Ormeau thing. It was, here's an idea. How about we try it? Wouldn't it be great if it happened every weekend? But if we were to do it one weekend, we can all see what the positives and negatives of it were, and then decide, is it something that can happen every weekend, or maybe once a month, or and it's that there's a barrier there at the moment around people being nervous about even trying things. And I personally believe that is one of the barriers that we need to really work hard to overcome, to encourage people to test things out, to experience it and then give feedback, rather than be wrapped up in fear about the potential of things going wrong.
Brilliant, Ciaran. I think that links in with some of the other conversations we've had throughout the week about this idea of, tactical urbanism and trying things out and testing them and learning from them being really important. I think that's something we can all take away from the Open Armo initiative, so thank you. I'm going to try and dovetail two questions, Ruth, that have come up next in relation to the Old Mill Court scheme. Mary says it's an excellent scheme, and how do we encourage developers to adopt the same design approach? So, social housing providers are really leading the way in terms of good design. How do we roll this out more widely? And I'll open that question out to the rest of you as well, because you might want to. And the second part of that question was about the idea of children's play and how it was provided for in Old Mill Court. Ruth, please.
Yes, so we are very passionate about our rural design guide, as it's a really good example of good practice in terms of building housing in rural communities. So whilst it is specifically for social housing, there's no reason why private developers could not be using a similar guide or using the rural design guide itself to build schemes that reflect the built environment of rural communities. And I think that's something, we've always been very happy to share our rural design guide with anyone who's interested in following that framework. So I think it's something that we would love to see rolled out, not just in social housing, but also in the private sector as well. So I totally agree with that comment. In terms of children's play, so children's play falls very much in line with good relations and community relations activities. So when we were developing our good relations plan with Old Mill Court, we met with all the tenants that were in the scheme, and quite a few of them were tenants with small children. So we wanted to ensure that we engaged those families through activities that included their children as well, because that's really important in terms of building community relations. So we've, over COVID-19, we've been producing family packs that encourage children to participate in arts and crafts while learning about cultures from around the world. We've also been hosting socially distanced activities for children within the grounds of Old Mill Court itself. So on Monday we have a circus act coming up to entertain the children. A couple of weeks ago we had our diversity event, which you saw on the video, which is around engaging children to engage in play, but also to learn about cultures through that as well. So there's always a good relations angle to your activities.
Brilliant. And any of the other speakers, any thoughts on how we can push the boundaries of good design and make it more widespread across all developments?
Certainly in terms of the private sector, my view on it really comes down to what there are two things that I see driving the private sector in those regards. One is what sells, and that's number one. What sells, and then what can we get? What do we have to do? And in the same way as people say, why do the private sector not produce really sustainable homes all the time? Why is that not normal? Why is everybody not just doing net zero energy because it's a really good idea and because you're going to have really low bills? Well, the simple response is the private sector will look, if we have that, the price will be maybe a bit more expensive for us to build, and I don't think it'll actually change whether someone will buy the house or not. In the same way as when it comes to design quality or following best practice in terms of a design guide for the rural homes, we see a lot of private housing being built which isn't driven by that agenda, and we don't feel that the planners are going to really push back on those design quality elements. In fact, I've spoken to so many people in the world of trying to create good quality rural housing who say that the real challenge they face is the application that comes in for housing, which is very similar to poor quality designed housing down the road, but meets the precedent, then it goes straight through. No bother, no questions asked. Whereas the application that goes in, which is more thoughtful, which is considered, which is more connected to the landscape and the location and the history of the area, suddenly has a degree of complexity to it that then it creates actually a more difficult route through the planning system, and that's not what private clients want.
Yeah, thanks, Ciaran.
In terms of the play side of things, I just wanted to sort of jump in to say, this is something we have been pushing for a long time in terms of particularly private developers. I think in terms of housing associations and social providers, there is an increasing recognition of the need to create. It's not just about housing; it's about communities. It's about creating spaces that people want to interact with, that people will find. It's almost an extension of their home in terms of the community and the social aspects to it. From the private side, we would struggle to really get the message across around if you create private housing developments that actually have the community at the heart, that create spaces that are playable. They'll be more attractive. You will, in all honesty, people will want to live there. They'll be a more attractive place to live. Some degree should be a sensible approach to take. It's not just about the housing. It's not just about the number of houses you can squeeze into a space. It's about the experience of living there. I do think it's something we've sort of been over the years. When we were doing work with the executive, it was something within the planning policy statements we were concerned about, that whilst play was recognised, there was really there was no actual requirement to create meaningful, playable community spaces. I do think it's something that we do need to look at if we genuinely want to create spaces that are going to be more positive for children, young people, and for whole communities to live in.
Brilliant, Alan, thank you. I think I'm going to, because we're slightly over time, I'm going to just ask one final quick question, if you could keep your answers very brief, but it's in line with some of the questions that have come in around what Alan touched on in terms of what planners can do and what the policy can do. In terms of, a local development plans and the likes of our open space policy, PPS 8, what do people think? I mean, what would be the advice to planning professionals in how and what needs to happen and how to influence more playfulness in public space and that idea that you were talking about, Alan, of it being spontaneous and our public spaces supporting that?
I think for me it really is about it's engaging with communities, but it's also about engaging with the likes of yourselves. We recently did a Shaper program aimed at community planning partnerships, and it was really about just trying to work with those agencies, those organisations who have a role in terms of influencing play, whether it be planning play, whether it be from a law enforcement perspective in the PSNI, to really understand what play was, the types of play that are undertaken, but also how you can actually create spaces and how you can use play as I don't like to say a diversionary activity, but how you can use play as a means of addressing issues and antisocial behaviour issues within communities and so on. So I think it's about understanding. It's about understanding that fundamentally children and young people want to play, and they will play in whatever space you give them. It doesn't matter, as adults, how we perceive a space. Children will find a way to engage with it, to play with it, and to manipulate that experience. Now, we may not like what they do with it. We may not like how they play, what they climb on, and so on. But we need to get better at actually speaking to children and young people and beginning to understand what are their primary motivations, what do they want from a space, and how can we actually help to deliver that in a way that is going to not only encourage them to engage in a playful manner, but that will actually create spaces that people want to come to. So in town centres and city centres and so on. One of the drives now is from an economic perspective to bring families back in again. How do we do that? It's not just about shopping, it's not just about transport, it's about the likes of Cathedral Gardens. It's creating that playful space that people want to come to, they want to visit, and once they're there, they actually want to interact with the facilities that are in the area. So I do think we need to, I think there's a fair amount of work to be done just in terms of shifting perceptions, shifting how we view spaces. But I think that engagement, particularly with children and young people, has to be at the core of it. Until we really understand and know what motivates those children to engage with the space, we really can't assume that we're going to be able to design and develop something that will meet that need.
Brilliant, Alan, thank you. And Ciaran, and Ruth, any final comments on that to round up?
I think it needs to be put front and centre And it's not about just thinking about it as a destination, the place you play. It's about play being at the front door, 100 yards away, 200 yards away, half a kilometre away. It needs to be thought in that every detail, and of course it links in beautifully to all the changes that we need to make anyway to our built environment in terms of addressing climate change. So how do we create communities where you can walk and cycle very easily, but you can't drive so easily? And of course, by not being able to drive so easily, it creates more space for children to play outside the front door in a safe environment. But it needs to be built into that plan where not only the new developments are going to incorporate that, but we have to build into the plan how we're going to address the legacy of development over the last 30 years, which has created communities which are 100% reliant on the car.
That's brilliant, Ciaran. I think that chimes in quite well with a lot of the conversations that have been going on this week as well throughout the conference. And Ruth, any final thoughts?
I would just echo Alan's thoughts in terms of ensuring that you adopt that community-led approach, so making sure that when you're developing play facilities in communities that it's actually what they need and what they want. And I think the knowledge of the local community is can bring much greater benefits in terms of planning than ourselves even. So I think tapping into that community-led approach is vital. Brilliant.
Folks, before we close up, for those of you who can hang on for a couple of minutes, I'm going to hand you over to the Director of the RTPI in Northern Ireland, Roisin Wilmot, to say a couple of words.
Thank you, Mura, and thank you, everyone. Today we've heard a really good presentation from all of our speakers, and I'd like to focus on one, which is from Ruth about Old Mill Court. And as we heard, it was a finalist at the RTPI Awards for Planning Excellence announced back in April. But it gives me great pleasure to announce today the winner of the 2020 Northern Ireland Award for Planning Excellence is made to the Rural Housing Association's Old Mill Court, so congratulations. Our award champions the very best examples of planning and planners in Northern Ireland and demonstrates the positive impact planning has on our quality of life and celebrates professional expertise. In this particular scheme, there's been careful consideration of the local character using design cues from the original cottage on the site and meeting the needs of rural residents in the design of Old Mill Court. The scheme has been designed within a wider regeneration master plan approach by GM Design through the Rural Design Guide, demonstrating good planning practice of looking beyond the red line of the site. Importantly, the engagement activities with local communities and agencies has also added value to the final outcomes. So congratulations to Rural Housing Association and their partners for Old Mill Court, winner of the 2020 Northern Ireland Award for Planning Excellence. Thank you. Back to you, Maura.
Thank you, Roisin.
Thank you, Roisin. And well done, Ruth, and Rural Housing Association, very well deserved.
That's a lovely surprise. Thank you.
So folks, that just leaves it to me to round up the session for today. Thank you very much all of you for hanging in. I know we've run a little bit over time, but I think we had some really excellent thoughts and opinions and ideas put through by all of our three speakers. So I just want to thank all of them, to Ciaran, to Ruth and to Alan. We really appreciate you coming along and participating in the conference. I think what Roisin said really resonated with me there about, as an urban designer, we're always trying to look beyond the red line, and your project, Ruth, shows that how to achieve that. But it is a really difficult task, and how do you join all of the various things that are going on? So no mean feat, so well done. I also want to pay thanks to our sponsors, to ARAP and to Landmark Chambers, for their support in making this whole event happen. And do please continue to follow the conversation online on Twitter, and there are a couple more events coming up throughout the week. And if you don't catch them live, you can catch them on the RTPI's YouTube channel as well. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending, and hope to see you all again soon, and enjoy the rest of your day.